Dr. Joe, who writes more than I read, which is really a sad thing. You ever get these tunes and you say, I'll never get through that book, so you don't start the book? But Joe's one of the guys who writes the books, so I don't know how it happens. But thank you, Joe, so much for another.
Well, thank you, Brian. Thank you very much for coming. My topic is the Iran nuclear deal, also known as the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. How is that for bureaucratic jargon? This is it, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. You can get it for free on the internet. It's 159 pages. I read it right to the end. You can see my little note next to the very last line there.
Wow.
And this was ratified or finalized on July 14th in Vienna of this year by Iran, Russia, China, Germany, France, Great Britain, the United States, and the European Union, those 8 parties. And then 5 days later, on July 20th, 2015, the United Nations Security Council passed Resolution 2231, which basically embraced the whole deal and then conditionally suspended all 6 of the Security Council resolutions sanctioning Iran for its nuclear programs. So my comments today will be grouped into 3 categories. First of all, I'll make some general observations, some background and overview. Secondly, I will get into some of the more problematic details of the plan itself. And then thirdly, I want to talk about the ideology or the worldview of the Iranian regime, which in some ways is the most important part of the whole talk. In case you're wondering, that's what that short video I'm going to show is all about. So, the big picture about this deal is that Iran has accepted temporary restraints on its right to enrich uranium for 15 years. And after 15 years, all those restraints will be lifted, and Iran can enrich as much uranium as it wants to any degree of purity that it wants, even weapons-grade purity. In return, in return for the permanent lifting of sanctions and restrictions, Iran gets, in return for temporary restraints on its nuclear program, Iran gets permanent relief from sanctions. So the deal does not require Iran to destroy any of its centrifuges. These are to be put in storage, unplugged and put in storage with cameras trained on them so the IAEA inspectors back in Vienna can verify that they're not spinning. Iran is allowed to continue research and development on new generations of more efficient centrifuges and other aspects of nuclear technology. Okay, so that's kind of a quick overview. So, a couple general questions to ask. Does Iran actually need nuclear energy? They claim this is all for peaceful purposes. They need nuclear power. Well, Iran has the 4th largest proven oil reserves in the world. Iran has the 2nd largest proven natural gas reserves in the world. Iran has vast solar power potential. It's a very sunny country in an arid part of the world with vast expanses of desert, a natural candidate for solar power. So one wonders exactly why they're so intent on developing nuclear energy. Even if Iran needed nuclear energy, it could import fuel rods, probably at a lower cost than it could by enriching uranium themselves and making the fuel for the reactors from scratch. Or Iran could import enriched uranium and then make its own fuel rods out of those. It doesn't need its own domestic uranium enrichment capacity with thousands upon thousands of centrifuges, in other words, to have nuclear power, even if it needed nuclear power, which it doesn't. And the same goes for medical radiation and imaging technologies. It doesn't need this vast industrial uranium enrichment capacity for any of those. All of those can be easily imported from countries that make these technologies more cheaply than the Iranians can make them themselves. Another important bit of background is that Iran has a rapidly improving ballistic missile program. Iran started with short-range ballistic missiles. It perfected those. Hezbollah now has hundreds of them with GPS targeting technology, half-ton conventional warheads. They can get virtually anywhere in Israel now from almost anywhere in Lebanon. Then they moved to medium-range ballistic missiles. And now they're working on intercontinental ballistic missiles. Maybe that has nothing to do with delivering nuclear warheads. Maybe it's a more efficient way of delivering Persian carpets to the American market. But usually when nations develop intercontinental ballistic missiles, it's for one reason and one reason only, to put nuclear warheads on top of them. All right, so that's the general, and then finally, Iran has a track record of threatening to obliterate other countries, including Israel and the United States and Great Britain. And it has a track record of violating the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, to which it is a signatory, like most countries in the world, and of thwarting inspections by the International Atomic Energy Agency. So in addition to the two documents I mentioned, the JCPOA and the Security Council resolution dealing with it, another relevant doctrine is the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons. You can get the text from the UN website. Iran has vowed, by signing this treaty, not to pursue nuclear weapons and to be transparent about its nuclear facilities so that the IAEA can confirm that no fissile material is being diverted to possible manufacturing of nuclear weapons. Those are the terms of the treaty. And the treaty gives countries the full right to develop peaceful nuclear technologies on the condition that they're abiding by that particular article of the treaty, Article 2. So Iran was found in clear violation of the Non-Proliferation Treaty about 15 years ago, in the early 2000s in the Bush administration, and that's what started the whole ball rolling. It's precisely because they had vast, totally secret nuclear facilities that the IAEA didn't know about and therefore couldn't inspect that this all started. So the basic idea is now, after 15 years, we're back to square one. We're back to where we were 20 years ago. Iran will be treated just as a normal signatory to the Non-Proliferation Treaty, as it had never been caught cheating in the first place. All right, so part two of my talk, troubling details in the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. So one of the more troubling aspects is that it actually obliges all the countries that signed this deal, all the European countries and the United States and China and Russia, to actually help Iran master nuclear science and technology. It calls for the establishment of research institutes in nuclear science in Iran, so that the rest of the world will be essentially transferring expertise to the Iranians. It requires the United States to eliminate the prohibition on Iranian students coming and training in nuclear science and engineering at American universities. It promises to help Iran to protect its nuclear program from sabotage. That's another aspect. Stop and think about that. Who's been trying to sabotage the Iranian program exactly? Well, us and the Israelis. Yeah. Now we're going to help them make sure that can't succeed in the future. Now, it does allow for the snapback of sanctions. There's been a lot of talk about this. The way that works is that if, let us say, the United States were convinced that the Iranians were cheating, or that the sanctions had to be reimposed, there is a very complicated way by which the U.S. can or another country could reintroduce the measure before the Security Council. And the way it works is that sanctions will there's a process whereby sanctions cannot be blocked by a veto by any of the five powers with a veto on the Security Council. It really is there, and it could conceivably be invoked. But under the terms of the deal itself, and this is repeated in two different places, Iran considers that it is completely released from all limits under the deal. In other words, as far as they're concerned, they can plug in all their centrifuges and start enriching uranium as much as they want. No restrictions at all. If any sanctions are reimposed, all the existing contracts that Iran has signed are grandfathered in, and they're exempt from any new sanctions that might be imposed. So this gives the Iranians, of course, an incentive to sign scads of contracts as open-ended as possible to protect future business transactions from Iran gets to keep the $50 to $150 billion in cash that it will be able to repatriate. It's currently frozen in foreign bank accounts because of the sanctions. Some of that is already committed to pay for imports. The Iranians probably won't get $150 billion in cash up front, but they could get, the best estimates I'm seeing are somewhere around $100 billion. But given the size of the Iranian economy, that's the equivalent of the United States getting $1 trillion or $2 trillion in cash all of a sudden. That's a lot of money in proportion to their economy. They get to keep that because they're going to basically get all of that back within the first year of the deal. And then if you stop and think about the arguments that the Obama administration has advanced against the rejection of the deal by Congress, let's say, all their arguments were, gee, if you reject this deal, there's no alternative but war. If you reject this deal, the US will be diplomatically isolated from all these other countries that we've been working with. And if you reject this deal, there won't be any restrictions on Iran's right to pursue nuclear technology and nuclear weapons. They're 2 or 3 months away from having enough enriched uranium for a bomb, and nothing will stop them. All of those arguments against rejecting the deal will apply against reimposing sanctions. All of them. So it's clear that President Obama is not being altogether sincere when he says there's no problem about snapping back sanctions. All of his arguments in favor of the deal are also arguments against the snapback of sanctions, in other words. Okay. Now, the deal calls for IAEA inspections at declared nuclear sites. The sites, that is to say, that we know about. We know about Fordo, we know about Natanz, we know about certain sites where Iran has been pursuing nuclear activity, previously in secret, when we didn't know about it. But what about undeclared nuclear sites? What if the US gets intelligence that Iran is is doing illicit things related to nuclear technology, nuclear weapons, at undeclared sites? Can the US, actually, by the way, no US inspectors are allowed into Iran. The only inspectors under the terms of the deal can come from countries that have diplomatic relations with Iran already. That means no Americans, no Canadians.
Oh my gosh.
Only countries that have diplomatic relations with Iran the inspectors can only be of those nationalities.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's wonderful.
Maybe we should hold questions till the end.
It's not a question, it's a comment. Joel Rubin, who works, he's third under Kerry, I spoke with him about a month ago. He was very much in favor of the deal, and he said the IAEA was our best shot, at objectivity for the sites that we don't know about.
Oh, okay.
So.
Okay.
That's what he assured us,
Yeah. Okay. Well, I have more to say about that. We'll have time to talk about this. There's a lot to be said about it. All right. So, especially what they've recently done at the Partisan site is very instructive. Yes. How much we can trust the IAEA, I think. But, okay. So, what about a suspected nuclear site that is undeclared? That isn't one of these official declared sites. Well. To get inspectors in there, let's say the U.S. has intelligence that something illicit is going on at some remote location or something. The deal calls for the establishment of what it calls the Joint Commission. The Joint Commission has 8 members. They're the parties I just mentioned before: Iran, Germany, Russia, China, France, Britain, the United States, and the European Union. 8 countries. A majority of those, 5 countries, would have to vote in favor of inspections, for those inspections to go forward at an undeclared site. Now, Iran has a vote. Iran is one of those votes. China, Russia, and Germany have a long track record of supporting Iran and opposing the United States. Germany, a little known fact, Germany has a disgraceful diplomatic track record of running interference for the Iranians and thwarting American efforts to impose sanctions on the Iranians, especially when it comes to nuclear technology. The Germans I recently reviewed a book by a German political scientist, Matthias Kunzel, called Germany and Iran from the Aryan Axis to the Nuclear Threshold for the Jewish Political Studies Review. And Kunzel documents in great detail that over a century, Germany's diplomatic and commercial relationship with Iran, which is very extensive. Germany is on Iran's side, basically, to make a long story short. So is Russia, so is China. The European Union at these talks has been represented by Federica Mogherini, an Italian politician who is used to be a communist. She belonged to the Italian Communist Party in her youth. She's now a socialist. She's consistently pro-Russian, very pro-Russian, and pro-Third World, generally in her outlook. The typical European leftist, reliably anti-Israeli and anti-American, in other words. So, of those 8 countries on the Joint Commission, the U.S. would have its work cut out for it, getting a majority vote for intrusive inspections. And moreover, the United States would have to present its evidence. Under the terms of the deal, the IAEA has to present its evidence to the Iranians initially, and then if anyone wants to call for further inspections, if the initial efforts to resolve the matter are not successful, it goes to the Joint Commission, and then the U.S. would have to present its evidence to Iran, Russia, and China. Whatever sensitive intelligence sources we have would have to be laid on the table to persuade the Joint Commission to go along with the intrusive inspections. What are the odds of that happening? I mean, you would really have to care. It's a difficult position for any future American president to be in. Do we betray our intelligence sources to Iran, China, and Russia? And then finally, Iran, at the highest levels, Ayatollah Khamenei and other top leaders of the regime have repeatedly said, since this deal was signed, that there will be no inspections at Iranian military bases, period. No matter what. We just won't allow inspectors in. And indeed, there is language, there's a clause in the deal which could be interpreted that way. It's a little ambiguous, but it could give the Iranians some cover for that. So, anyway, this is all problematic. Now, the other thing is there's a dispute resolution mechanism that goes through multiple stages involving the Joint Commission. If they can't settle it, then the foreign ministers of the relevant countries. There's potentially at least a 24-day period for which Iran could delay inspections at undeclared sites. At least 24 days. If you read it carefully, you can see there's ways of dragging that out further. And then the Iranians could say, okay, we've got a dispute that we can't resolve. We have to invoke the dispute resolution mechanism. That goes through multiple stages. If you add it up, it's 15 days plus 15 days plus 15 days plus 5 days. 50 days altogether, added to the original 24. You're at least 74 days out. So you lay your intelligence on the table. You say to the Iranians, we're interested in that site, in that building. That's what we want to look at. The Iranians easily have 74 days to clean that site up and get ready for the inspectors. They just did it at Parchment. They just did it. In 2012, someone, we still don't know who, gave intelligence to the IAEA saying, we think the Iranians are conducting illicit nuclear tests at the Parchment military base in this specific building. So the IAEA went to the Iranians and said, under the Non-Proliferation Treaty, we have the right to come and do inspections. We want to look at that building. The Iranians delayed and delayed and delayed. 2012, this was. U.S. satellite surveillance showed bulldozers removing all the topsoil from all around that building, and then coming in and replacing putting fresh topsoil in. The interior of the building apparently underwent all kinds of renovations, a lot of activity in and out. They probably replaced the floors, the walls, the ceilings. So just this month, September of 2015, the IAEA finally got its inspections. Here's how it worked. IAEA inspectors back in Vienna watched by remote control through cameras as Iranian officials took swabs and wiped down, took samples and swabs from in and around that building, and then mailed the stuff to Vienna so that the test could be done at the IAEA lab. September of 2015, it just happened. Now, the test results are not in yet. But will anyone be surprised if the tests are negative? We didn't find any any evidence of illicit activity at the site. Tests were all negative. So if that's what the IAEA has in store for us, the Iranians are shaking in their boots, aren't they? Oh boy, they better not cheat. They'll never get away with it.
That same person also mentioned that...
I'm being sarcastic. Did you tell that?
So on the
Did you tell that I
camera
was being
angle.
sarcastic? Yes.
That the traces of the uranium, he assured us, would last far longer than the amount of days.
Radioactive material is hard to
That's
cleanse.
what he said.
It's hard to get rid of. Yeah,
It's
and
not
maybe they didn't succeed, right? Would you want to be the Iranian guy in charge of that cleanup if the tests come back positive? Oh boy! Yeah. Imagine him right now. Right now, yeah. Maybe he's boarded a plane for a vacation in Miami or something. Until the test results come in. Possibly the Ayatollahs didn't let him do that, though. I don't know. So, right. So some things we can talk about that. And fortunately, we have in this room someone with a PhD in physics. Mike Miller, right here, PhD in physics. Then that wasn't enough studying for him, so he went to medical school and had a long career as a radiologist, no less. So no one knows radioactive materials like Mike, and he can maybe speak to that afterwards in the Q&A. All right, so another troubling aspect of the deal is the UN Security Council resolution 2231, passed by the Security Council 5 days after the deal, in a neat end run around the US Senate and the US Constitution. The Iranians said, we're only dealing with nuclear issues in the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. The Americans wanted to deal with conventional weapons and ballistic technology as well. The Americans wanted to say, you know, the restrictions on imports of ballistic missile technology and conventional weapons technology have to be spelled out in this deal. The Iranians said, no way, we're not doing that. So the Americans backed down, of course. Of course they, when did they not back down in these negotiations? And they said, we'll put it in the UN Security Council resolution. So if you look at the resolution, it says that imports on ballistic missile technologies are prohibited for 8 years. But not after 8 years. And then on conventional weapons, battle tanks, armored combat vehicles, large caliber artillery systems, combat aircraft, attack helicopters, warships, missiles, or missile systems, the ban on importing those things lasts for 5 years. The Iranians have repeatedly said that, and just recently, I mean, since the deal was ratified, they've said, as far as we're concerned, UN Security Council resolutions are not binding on us. This deal is binding on us. We accept it. The Security Council resolution, that has nothing to do with us. As far as they're concerned, as soon as this deal is implemented, they can start importing ballistic missile technology and conventional weapons. They don't have to wait 5 or 8 years. They can do that right away. That's their reading of the deal. And they even very cleverly got a clause. It's in a footnote. It's literally the very last line on page 159. The provisions of this resolution, that is the Security Council resolution, referred to in the text here, do not constitute provisions of this Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. In other words, the Iranians very neatly wrote into the deal that it's not, that whatever is in the UN resolution is not a part of this deal. This is binding on them. The UN resolution is not. And they've said this, made this very clear, stated explicitly on numerous occasions, and it's gotten almost no attention in the mainstream media. It's almost like, you know, the journalists at the New York Times, it's too complicated for them. They just can't hold this all in their minds at once, so they just don't report details like this.
They just signed a deal with Russia for I don't know how many billions of dollars worth of airplanes and technology and
anti-aircraft defense systems.
Anti-aircraft and
right.
airplanes.
Huge
the
deal.
The Sukhoi whatever number is there. They're going to get it.
They said we're not going to abide by the
Right.
Security Council.
It's already signed the deal.
And they're keeping their word.
Yes.
All right. So part 3 of my talk has to do with the ideology of the Iranian regime. And this is the most troubling thing at all. As I said, most countries in the world, whatever, 180 some countries, have signed the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. These include countries like Japan, Germany, the Netherlands. They promise not to pursue nuclear weapons. They allow the IAEA to confirm that they're not pursuing nuclear weapons. And in exchange, they can have peaceful nuclear technologies, like nuclear reactors and power plants and stuff like that. The question is and Iran will be treated just like any other signatory to the Non-Proliferation Treaty, after this deal is implemented and over and done with in 15 years. Actually, sooner than that. So does it make sense to treat Iran like Germany, the Netherlands, or Japan? Consider some clauses from the Constitution of the Islamic Republic of Iran. These are both from the preamble. The Constitution provides the necessary basis for ensuring the continuation of the revolution at home and abroad. In other words, the Constitution of Iran binds the government to export its Islamic revolution to other countries. And of course it's doing that, isn't it? In Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Yemen. Yeah. Another clause, the Army of the Islamic Republic of Iran and the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps will be responsible not only for guarding and preserving the frontiers of the country, but also for fulfilling the ideological mission of jihad in God's way. That is, extending the sovereignty of God's law throughout the world. This is in accordance with the Quranic verse, quote, "Prepare against them whatever force you are able to muster, and strings of horses, striking fear into the enemy of God and others beside them." So in other words, this is a country whose constitution obliges it to an imperialistic foreign policy. They're saying, we, as a matter of constitutional obligation, our army has to fight to extend Islamic rule to the entire world. Imagine if France had a clause in its constitution saying the French Republic shall, the army of the French Republic shall fight until France rules the world.
We have no fighting.
So I mean, it's unthinkable. And you won't read this in the New York Times. It's not there. The most disturbing aspect, however, of the regime's ideology is its Jew hatred. Anti-Semitism is far too mild a word for it. The Ayatollah Khomeini held that the Jews seek world domination and the destruction of Islam. So, a few quotations from Amir Taheri's excellent biography of the Ayatollah Khomeini. The Ayatollah was convinced that the central political theme of contemporary life was an elaborate and highly complex conspiracy by the Jews, quote, who controlled everything, those are Khomeini's words, to, quote, emasculate Islam, those are Khomeini's words, and dominate the world thanks to the natural wealth of the Muslim nations. According to Khomeini, the Jews would, quote, would never be satisfied with anything less than world domination. Khomeini took up, quote, the cause of physically destroying the Jewish state and forcing its inhabitants out of the Middle East. Khomeini has no inhibitions about, this is written when Khomeini was still alive in the 1980s. Khomeini has no inhibitions about branding the Jews as responsible for almost all the ills of this world and calling on Muslims to prepare for holy war and qital, killing in the name of Allah, against the Jewish state. Khomeini told his followers that America is dominated by, quote, evil Jews and is the arch enemy of Islam, not of Iran, but of Islam. So, we have then the striking belief, and it was a sincerely held belief of Khomeini, that the Jews were out to control the world and to destroy Islam and to destroy Muslims. So that was not an idiosyncratic view of the Ayatollah Khomeini, who died in 1989. it is a view that is integral to the regime. So, for example, one of the leading experts on modern Iran in the world today is Meir Litvak, who's director of the Center for Iranian Studies at Tel Aviv University. And Meir Litvak is a superb article on Iranian anti-Semitism. In Iran, he points out, the state itself leads the anti-Semitic campaign. For instance, state-run Iranian television regularly broadcasts documentaries and drama shows based on the protocols of the Elders of Zion. Such programs claim that the state of Israel was founded on the basis of the protocols of the Elders of Zion, which exposed the Jewish plot to take over the world. The programs also depict Jews as murderers, bloodthirsty demons, and criminals. And if we turn to the protocols of the Elders of Zion, we read such things as this. This is, do you all know this? As best as historians can make out, it was a forgery by agents of the Russian Tsarist secret police around 1900, at a time when the last two czars of Russia, Alexander III and Nicholas II, were vicious anti-Semites. They wanted to drive all the Jews out, and that's where all the pogroms came in. This was a part of the effort to drive the Jews out, to motivate the pogroms. So we read in the protocols of the Elders of Zion, we, that is, the Elders of Zion, the Jews, we are interested in the diminution, the killing out of the Goyim, non-Jews. We read also in the protocols, when we come into our kingdom, it will be undesirable for us that there should exist any other religion than ours of the one God. We must therefore sweep away all other forms of belief. So this, by the way, was absolutely central to the worldview of the Nazi Party. If you read anything about Nazi ideology, there's a great book by Jeffrey Herf, a historian at the University of Maryland, called The Jewish Enemy. Harvard University Press, 2007, where Herf gives example after example. And Herf's thesis in that book is that what was central to the Holocaust was the Nazi conviction, the conviction of Goebbels and Hitler and Himmler, that there was a global Jewish conspiracy to take over the world and destroy the German people, because of course they're non-Jews. So Hitler again and again told his followers, either we annihilate them or they will annihilate us. Again and again, this very stark either or, no middle position here. One finds exactly the same claim in Iranian propaganda. And not only that, it's in the Hamas Covenant, it's in the writings of the Muslim Brotherhood, Sayyid Qutb, for example. It's a central tenet to Islamist anti-Semitism or Jew hatred. It's a distinct, this is not the anti-Semitism that kept Jews out of Ivy League universities or country clubs in the United States, 50 or 60 years ago. It's not generalized ethnic prejudice. This is a warrant for genocide. And in fact, one of the best academic studies of the protocols of the Elders of Zion was by Norman Cohn. The title of the book is Warrant for Genocide, The Myth of the Jewish World Conspiracy and the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. Came out in 1968. It's a superb book. And in his foreword, Cohn writes the following: as I see it, the deadliest kind of anti-Semitism, the kind that results in massacre and attempted genocide, has little to do with real conflicts of interest between living people, or even with racial prejudice as such. At its heart lies the belief that Jews, all Jews everywhere, form a conspiratorial body set on ruining and then dominating the rest of mankind. Well, that's exactly what we find at the heart of the Iranian regime. Now, I want to show you a 4-minute clip by an advisor to Ayatollah Khamenei, a man named Mehdi Tayyib. He is a Shiite theologian. He's taught Shiite theology at schools of theology in Iran. Yeah. And he runs a think tank, the Amar think tank. This is from a talk that he gave in 2013 in Iran. Bear in mind, this guy's an advisor to the supreme leader of Iran, Ayatollah Khamenei. So here we get a glimpse into the worldview of this regime.
این آرمه ستاره داوود که رو پرچم اسرائیل می‌بینید، اگر به این دقت کنید می‌فهمید یهود چیه. این کل خواسته یهود رو در خودش جا داره. یهودیان یه خواسته دارن کل دنیاست، اما این کل دنیا رو تو 3 مرحله باید بگیرن. مرحله اول قدسه، بعد بیت المقدس رو آزاد کنن، در اونجا مستقر بشن، فلسطین. مرحله دوم عملیاتشون نیل تا فرات رو آزاد کنن. مرحله سوم عملیاتشون اینه که کل دنیا رو برن بگیرن. این ستاره داوود حاکی از اینه. می‌بینید ستاره داوود ستاره 6 بره، نوک ستاره ها پیکانه. این ستاره باید در بیت المقدس طلوع کنه، اونجا طالع بشه. وقتی طالع شد، اون 2 خط آبی که بالای این ستاره هست، اون بره سر جاش قرار بگیره. اون نیل و فراته، اینا بره سر جاش قرار بگیره. بعد این نوک ستاره ها که پیکان هست در 6 شهر بره اون برای کره زمین برسه به هم دیگه. مردم دنیا رو 3 درجه کردن. در دیدگاه اینا مردم دنیا 3 درجه، انسان‌های درجه 1، انسان‌های درجه 2، انسان‌های درجه 3. انسان‌های درجه 1 خودشونن، یهودی‌ها هستن، نژاد بنی اسرائیل. خدا دنیا رو برای اینا خلق کرده، دنیا رو بخشیده به اینها، به اینا گفته برید دنیا رو بگیرید. انسان‌های درجه 2 اونایی که نژاد بنی اسرائیل نیستن، یعنی هم اولاد یعقوب نیستن، اما قبول دارن که یهودی‌ها درجه 1، اینایی که از نژاد بنی اسرائیل نیستن ولی قبول دارن که بنی اسرائیل درجه 1، حاکمیت جهانی یهود قبول دارن، اینا انسان‌های درجه 2 هستن. اینا حکمشون چیه؟ اینا حکمشون که حق حیات دارن ولی باید به بنی اسرائیل خدمت کنن. انسان‌های درجه 3، انسان‌های درجه 3 کیا هستن؟ کسانی هستن که از نژاد غیر بنی اسرائیل و برتری یهود قبول ندارن. اینا حکمشون چیه؟ یه زیر زمین مال ایناست. مسلمان ها چون قبول ندارن برتری یهود رو، همه باید کشته بشه. اینجا یه نکته ای رو براتون بگم. بمب اتم دنیا تو این دنیا به درد کی میخوره؟ مال کیه؟ بمب اتم تو دنیا به درد کی میخوره؟ ببینید تنها مکتبی که برای جهانی شدن به کشتار وسیع نیاز داره یهودی‌ها. ما الان 1,400,000,000 مسلمانیم. هیچ مسلمانی برتری نژادی یهود رو قبول نداره. برای یهود برای جهانی شدن یه قلمی رو که باید بکشه، طبق دستورالعمل مسلمان‌ها هستن، یعنی 1,400,000,000 نفر رو باید بکشه. خب اگر اینا رو بخواد با این ابزار کشتار معمولی بکشه، یعنی با موشک‌ها و کلاهک‌های اتمی و اینا، کلاهک‌های معمولی، ولی یه کلاهک حداکثر 1 تن وزنشه، بندازن 500 نفر کشته میشه. برای اینکه شما 1,400,000,000 نفر رو بکشی، باید 10 میلیون بمب کلاهک 1 تنی بندازی. اصلا جا نداری اینا رو دفاع کنی. بنابراین باید یه ابزاری داشته بشه کشتار فله‌ای را بندازه. وقتی میندازی یا 500,000 نفر رو بکشه، 400,000 نفر رو بکشه. اونی که این کار دستش برمیاد بمب اتم. بمب اتم میدونی کی اختراع اختراعش کرد؟ انیشتین در ریاضیات آبرومنده ولی در جهان سیاست جزء بی‌آبروهای تاریخه. چرا؟ چون صهیونیست بود، یهودی بود، جزء پایه‌گذاران کشور اسرائیل.
He's a raving lunatic. People listen to him.
All that from looking at the Israeli flag. I wonder what he thinks of the Taiwanese flag. The sun has 12 points.
Yeah. You could find another talk by the same guy in which he says that the Jews are using sorcery against the Muslim world. They're masters of sorcery, in case you didn't know.
Oh yeah, always have been, right?
This is the kind of regime we're dealing with. This is the regime that Barack Obama says is basically rational. They care about their survival. They're not going to do anything that would, lead to a massive retaliation against them that would threaten the survival of their regime. So they're basically rational. Just like Adolf Hitler was basically rational. Yeah. Stalin, there's no way he's going to attack me. He hasn't He hasn't finished off the British in the West. He's not going to fight a two-front war. It would be irrational to fight a two-front war. Of course, Hitler's not going to invade me in the summer of 1941. Except Hitler was convinced that he was fighting a war for the very survival of the German people, that the British, the Americans, and the Bolsheviks were all under the control of the Jews. They were all part of this global Jewish conspiracy to destroy the German people.
Yeah.
So he didn't behave quite so rationally in the end, after all.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm finished talking, and we can open the floor up for questions.